In my previous video, I got one rim and tire to fit on the driver's side rear of my 2000 GT with the 5/16" spacer I needed to keep my new 315/30/18 Rival S 1.5 tires from hitting the IRS bracket bolt head at full suspension droop. But the other three rims and tires had less than 6 threads of engagement on the lug nuts, and that's not enough to be safe. To solve that problem, I'm installing ARP 2.5" wheel studs that I got from Stida. These ARP studs have a 0.625" knurled diameter, which means they're a direct fit for 1979 to 2004 rear axles, SN95 Cobra IRS rear hubs, and 1979 to 1993 front rotors. If you plan on using them in 1994 to 2004 front hubs, you'll have to enlarge the holes with a 39/64" drill bit. The ARP 2.5" wheel studs have speed starter tips to prevent cross-threading. They're also cadmium plated to reduce corrosion. In nearly 30 years of working on my Mustangs, I've never installed extended wheel studs before. But when you're fitting wider rims and tires for autocross, longer wheel studs are often necessary. I thought my experience might help other people who are installing extended wheel studs for the first time. I've seen a lot of videos where people use a hammer or a mini-sledge to knock out the OEM wheel studs, and an air impact wrench to install the new wheel studs. But on the IRS, using a hammer or a mini-sledge can potentially damage the wheel bearings, resulting in a larger, much more expensive job. And not everyone has an air impact wrench. So I wanted to show how I pressed the OEM wheel studs out, and how I installed the ARP 2.5" wheel studs without using a pneumatic tool. The wheel studs can be removed and replaced with the rear hub on the car, which is great because the IRS hubs need to be pressed out of the spindle, and taking the spindle off of the car would require getting another alignment. On SN95 Cobra IRS assemblies, there isn't a lot of room between the hub and the spindle for a bulky tool, so I needed something that was small but strong. I picked up this Pittsburgh Automotive 3/4" forged ball joint separator. It's a relatively compact, simple design, it's forged for strength, and it fits in the tight space between the hub and spindle. It's also only about $20, so it's an inexpensive experiment. The Pittsburgh Automotive ball joint separator has 2 pivot points. The top hole allows the tool to open wide enough for the OEM wheel stud length. The only problem is that the space between the forks isn't big enough to fit around the head of the wheel studs, but it's very close. Just a little bit of grinding provided enough clearance. Even though you're only taking a little material off of the tool, you are technically weakening it. And this tool is not sold as a wheel stud removal tool. You're using a lot of force to get the stud out of the hole. As you'll see, there is some risk of damage and injury using the method in this video. Follow this method at your own risk, or have a professional mechanic do the work. I tested the tool on 2 other rear ends I have in storage. It worked perfectly. The OEM studs pressed out slowly and smoothly without any drama. But there was some drama when I pressed out the first stud on my 2000 GT, which is why you should always wear safety goggles and be really careful when pressing out wheel studs. Put the car up on jack stands. If you're only raising the rear, make sure the car can't roll forward. Remove the brake caliper and rotor. You have to line up the wheel stud you want to take out with the open area of the spindle in order to have enough room to remove the OEM wheel stud and install the longer ARP wheel stud. I sprayed some penetrating oil on the studs and let them sit for 10 minutes. I put a liberal amount of anti-seize on the pin, the bolt, and where the bolt contacts the tool. Here's real-time footage of the tool removing the OEM wheel stud. Oh! You can hear how surprised I was when the OEM wheel stud popped out of the hub. That didn't happen when I tested this method on my other rear ends. It actually came out with enough force for the wheel stud and the tool to chip the spindle. So I put some padding behind the hub when I removed the other studs. 3 of the studs popped out with a vengeance. The other 2 came out smoothly. Each stud took about 1 minute to remove. Despite the theatrics, I still think this method is better than wailing on the stud with a mini-sledge. But when I repeat this process on my other car, I plan on using a lug nut to prevent the stud from flying out, and a foam pad to protect the hub. I clean the holes with some Scotch-Brite and brake cleaner before installing the ARP 2.5-inch wheel studs. There's another inexpensive tool that makes installing the wheel studs really easy. I'm using the Lyle Wheel Stud Installation Tool. It's got a beveled body that centers the stud and an internal bearing that allows the tool to turn easily as you draw the stud into the hub with a lug nut. It costs about $25. Use anti-seize on the hub, the threads of the new stud, and the beveled area of the tool. And use an OEM-style lug nut with good threads. Make sure everything is lined up straight, then slowly tighten the lug nut. Here's real-time video of the installation using a ratchet. It only took me about 1 minute to install the ARP 2.5-inch wheel stud. No air impact wrench necessary. Adding up the time required to rotate the axle, set up the tools, and apply the anti-seize, it took about 30 minutes to remove all 5 OEM wheel studs and install all 5 ARP wheel studs. Factor in another 30 minutes to jack up the car and remove the wheel, brake caliper, and rotor, and another 30 minutes to put everything back together, and you can expect to spend 1.5 hours swapping out the studs in each IRS hub. I needed to use open-end spline drive lug nuts with my setup. I got these from LMR. They've got a chrome finish and they include a spline drive key. The ARP 2.5-inch wheel studs allowed me to use a 3/8-inch wheel spacer from Maximum Motorsports. It'll give me a little more clearance, and it's a better design than the 5/16-inch Mr. Gasket spacer. As you can see, the Mr. Gasket wheel spacer doesn't fit as precisely as the Maximum Motorsports spacer. With the ARP 2.5-inch wheel studs and the 3/8-inch Maximum Motorsports wheel spacer in place, it took 15 turns for my open-end lug nuts to fully tighten. All 4 rims and tires fit on the driver's side rear of the car now, which means I can rotate my tires in between events. My extended wheel studs will help extend the life of my tires. So, while there were a few surprises along the way, the installation of the ARP 2.5-inch wheel studs was pretty straightforward. If you choose to use the method and tools in this video, being as safe as possible and working slowly are a must. Now that my stallion has some bigger studs, it's time to get back out on course.